We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? What was it like?
Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hello listeners, this is Paula Scheffner with episode 46, Clerical Error. This first aired on February 28th, 1980. The IMDb synopsis is, Mork decides to become a priest, which is one of the shorter descriptions. This was the 37th episode directed by Howard Storm, the 12th written by April Kelly, whose most recent episode was Mommy for Morky, but she also contributed some weaker episodes like Mork and the Immigrant in season 1. There's a sunny exterior of the house, and as with all of the exteriors where we can see the ground, there is snow. Mindy is in the kitchen pouring coffee. There's a knock. With sort of a country accent, she invites Jeannie in. Jeannie is carrying what might possibly be some textbooks, and I wondered if they were heading over to the campus. There's mild applause at Jeannie's entrance. Mindy asks if Jeannie wants something to eat before they go. Jeannie says that Mindy won't believe this, but Remo made breakfast in bed for her. Mindy says Mork did that once. She got a surprise sliding under the covers and into a bowl of oatmeal. Mork enters dressed for hockey, and he's covered his teeth with black paper so that he'll look like the other hockey players, a reference to the image of hockey players who have had their teeth knocked out. Mindy asks if he enjoyed his first game. He said it was strange. The object of the game seems to wait till the referee drops the puck on the ice. Then you hit the guy next to you. Then you skate around for 2 hours. So obviously he was out there pretty early if Mindy is offering breakfast. Then you're supposed to hit as many people as you can till you get a stick through the skull. He says he would stay here and swap jock stories, but he has a job interview to get ready for. And then he says maybe they'll make me a congressman, and I didn't get it. Like there'd been lost dialogue or something. Then we get a sunny exterior of the deli. Mindy wonders where Mork is. He was supposed to meet her here over half an hour ago. She sits at the middle counter as Jeannie pours coffee. As I was watching this episode, I was trying to remember, I think that there was a very early episode where Fred thought that Mindy didn't drink coffee, and obviously that has not been proven to be so. Mindy hopes that Mork being late means that he found a job. Jeannie wonders what kind of job Mork is looking for. Mindy says anything they'll pay him enough to live on, and Jeannie says that he's looking in the wrong country.
Presenting the first official Remo da Vinci wedding cake.
Oh, that's really nice. It's for the reception here tomorrow.
Note the unique corkscrew construction. Why, you may ask? Allow me to demonstrate. Full Do you dig the symbolism?
I'm not quite sure.
Marriage is like a ride down a wedding cake. You might be educated. I'm deep.
I'm just going to say right now that Remo's cake is the highlight of the episode for me. Even though sometimes he's presented as stupid, he also sees himself as deep, and so this cake is symbolic, although he doesn't explain exactly how it symbolizes marriage. Jeannie thinks it's a little silly to have a wedding reception in a delicatessen. Remo wants people to look upon him as more than a tongue and tuna man, which I thought was suggestive, although it may not have been meant that way. This is their chance to have a class operation. Jeannie says she never heard that one on Fantasy Island. So yes, another Fantasy Island reference. She offers to help him decorate the Betty Crocker Speedway. It's not that negative, but he asks how she'd like to have her tongue depressed. And I wondered if this was a callback to the tongue thing and then also having to do with her being an aspiring doctor. She says, how would you like a knockwurst up your nose? And he starts to wheel the cake back into the kitchen. Mork enters in a torn shirt with green paint splatters, and his hair is very disheveled. The audience oohs like something big has happened. Mindy looks shocked. She asks what happened. He says she wouldn't want to talk to him because he's spider spit. They sit at neighboring tables. He says he's not fit to oil her Olay. Reference to oil of Olay. She says, you didn't get the job? He says, worse, he got it and then lost it because of his suspenders. There were 32 homicidal midgets masquerading as children. They bit him in places he couldn't even reach. The green paint is from a child who wanted to play leapfrog and is into realism. So Mork wrapped his suspenders around the little boy's head, and he imitates the boy saying, help me, and the audience applauds. So I thought this was odd because we just had an episode where Mark was thriving at a daycare and, of course, also played a frog. So I wondered if there was an air date issue here, but either way, it's an odd contrast to the Pine Tree daycare. Mindy is sorry he had such a rough day. Mark wonders what's wrong with him. There's got to be something he could do for a job. Then he decides that dressed like this, he could become a punk comedian. He says, knock, knock. Mindy says, who's there? And he says, who cares? Then he laughs maniacally. She tells him not to give up. There's got to be a job out there somewhere. A priest enters and takes off his hat. He asks if Mr. Da Vinci is there. Mindy calls him father and says Remo is in the back. The priest thanks her and goes in the kitchen. Mark asks Mindy why she called the man father. She says everyone does. Mark says he must be real busy, and I didn't know if he meant because he has a lot of kids or because he's making a lot of kids. Mindy says no, he's with the church. He's a priest. His job is to help people. Mark wonders if the man can get him some paint remover. Remo returns with the priest and says, don't worry about a thing, father. He's going to make the best possible reception for the future Winslows. The priest just wants to make sure that they don't start their marriage off on the wrong foot. Remo says to just leave everything to him, Mr. Remo of Boulder. He's going to create the perfect nuptial atmosphere. He'll hang bells on the salamis. He's going to have a big cupid come down from the ceiling, fully dressed. The priest tells him that he'd better do his best. Don't force me to make a threatening prayer. Mark goes over and says, excuse me, everyone's father. They shake hands. The priest is Father Denny. Mark says he's Mark the screw-up. He asks if it's true that the priest helps people. He says he tries and asks if Mark has a problem. Mindy comes over and says that Mark is depressed because he can't hold a job and he feels like a loser. The priest chuckles and says, well, how do you think I felt when Tom Magazine announced that God was dead? He grins and winks and says, of course it just turned out to be a rumor after all. The Time Magazine issue that came out on April 6, 1966 actually phrased it as a question, is God dead? Mark asks Father Denny if there's any way that he can help him. The priest says that he can give Mark a bit of advice.
When you're standing there at home plate, it doesn't matter whether you're a slugger or a bunter, you've got to lean into the ball.
Thanks, Father. That kind of helps.
Yeah. That's from my sermon to the newlyweds.
So now marriage is being compared to baseball, and in fact it's one of several baseball mentions in this episode. Father Denny asks Mark if he really wants to work. Mark says, yes, sir. I don't want to be a hickey on the neck of life. And the priest says that that's very poetic. I don't know that hickeys are necessarily useless or idle. Father Denny suggests that Remo hire Mark. Remo laughs. He loves Mark. He really loves him. But the last time he asked Mark to help him, Mark used the exhaust fan to slice bologna. So another thing of Mark and bologna. Remo had sandwiches 3 blocks away. If Remo knew that Mark was looking for a job and wanted to hire him, that would be his choice. It shouldn't be something that this priest is pressuring him into. Father Denny suggests that Remo just give Mark something to do for the reception. That way Remo would be helping Mark a lot. Remo says he thinks he remembers hearing that God helps those who help themselves. Father Denny puts his hand on Remo's shoulder and pulls him forward. He says, but maybe you also heard that he can be a little rough on those who don't help others. Remo looks up and says, oh, I get it. He's going to make me an offer I can't refuse. So, a Godfather reference. Father Denny is played by Gary Goodrow, who was then about 47. His career lasted from 1961 to 2008, and he died in 2014. He would play a bank loan officer and a bank manager on unrelated Laverne and Shirley episodes. He's in this episode quite a bit, so I'll talk about his performance more specifically later. We get a closer exterior of the deli. We can see a couple eating on the bench. Judy and Mark are behind the stage right counter. They do a little medical routine, which I think is another hint of her medical ambitions. So they do knife, knife, fork, fork, mayo, mayo. And it ends with him wiping mayo on her hand with a spatula. She tells him to hold the mayo and slaps it back onto his hand. The audience applauds. She exits to clean up in the kitchen while he wipes his hand with a towel. Remo is in a chef's hat, a tuxedo t-shirt, and he's behind the other counter putting yellow flowers on napkin holders. He asks if Mark took out the garbage like he asked him to. Mark says no, the roaches weren't finished with it yet. I would think this would be a concern for the health department, and really you don't want to have a wedding reception somewhere where there are roaches. Remo is trying to class the place up so Father Denny doesn't put a curse on him.
Oh, he's into voodoo. I know about that.
Oh, tell me the drums that make me sweat.
Shut up, Margaret. Stand and drink your quinine.
I don't know if he's referring to a specific movie. I didn't really get it. I'm not clear why Father Denny is so menacing towards Remo. I don't know if he's Remo's particular priest. It feels odd. He could have been fatherly and just wanted them to have a nice wedding and brought out the best in Remo, but the godfather thing and the curse, odd tone. Remo is amused by Mark's little voodoo scene. Father Denny enters and greets the fellas. He says he really likes what Remo's done with the place. And then he admits that this isn't true. A priest has to fib every now and then, even though lying is a sin. Mark tells Father Denny not to worry. Mark is in charge of les decorations. I realize that does not sound like a French accent. And he shows him a centerpiece of the bride and groom made completely out of chopped liver. He asks Father Denny if he likes where Mark placed the pickle. Suggestive phallic moment there. The priest takes off his hat and says nobody's ever asked him that question before. A young woman enters. Father Denny says, "Laurie, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be getting married in 2 hours." That's what she wants to talk to him about. Mark says to Remo that this is amazing that he can see her clear as day. Mindy said you can't see the bride before she gets married. And I could have sworn that they've used this joke before, maybe on the Exeter's wedding episode. Felt kind of stale and contrived here in any case. Laurie is getting cold feet. Mark offers to loan her his socks. Laurie doesn't react to this and says she doesn't know if she wants to give up her freedom by getting married. The priest suggests that they sit down and discuss that. He has taken her hand and he still holds it as they go to sit down at the nearest table. Mark sits down first, so Father Denny ends up in his lap. Then he gets up and smiles at Mark. So he seems to have taken a bit of a liking to Mark. Laurie, who's in the credits as future bride, was played by Wendy Cutler, who was then 26. Her career ran from 1977 to at least 2021, including 2 roles on Laverne and Shirley. We never find out if she gets married. In fact, the entire plot about Remo hosting a wedding reception is forgotten as we move on to the main plot as mentioned in the IMDb synopsis. There's a nighttime exterior of the house. Mark is pacing and he says, "Pace, pace, pace." Then he paces backward and says, "E-cap, E-cap, E-cap." So the word pace backwards, and then he does pace, pace, pace again. Mindy enters through the front door. Mark says she's finally home. She's sorry she's late. She wanted to buy a few things and she lost track of time. And she's holding a white plastic bag. She asks if he missed her and he says no. He's got really exciting news. But he wants her to tell her news first. She says she doesn't have any. He says, "Do I have to do everything around here?" She takes a potted plant out of the bag and it's got purple flowers on it. Presumably she was at the florist's. He's decided what he wants to do with his life. She says that's the spirit. He says close. He wants to become a priest. She goes into the living room and says that that's ludicrous. He says, "I know, isn't it wonderful?" As if he doesn't know the word ludicrous. He says that after seeing Father Denny yesterday, he realized what he really wants to do. And I was confused because I didn't know that this was the next day. The timeline on this episode is odd. Mark wants to celebrate whatever Father Denny celebrates. Mindy says that Father Denny is celibate. That means he's married to the church. Mark and Mindy sit on the couch. Mark scoffs and wonders where Father Denny would get a wedding ring that big. Mindy says he can't be a priest. Mark says they do what he wants to do. They help people, they solve problems, and they play bingo. She says sometimes those problems are a matter of life and death, so foreshadowing, and a priest can only deal with them with his faith. But a later scene implies it's not just a matter of faith. They both stand. Tomorrow morning she'll take him to the church and Father Denny will explain why Mark can't become a priest. Mark says, "Don't you see the advantages? He can wear that wonderful black habit and dress up as Johnny Cash." Singer Johnny Cash was known for wearing a lot of black. And then he says, "Hi, I'm Father Mark," in a Johnny Cash imitation. And besides, Mark has seen all the movies about priests that were ever made. Even though he didn't know what a priest was yesterday, somehow he has seen all of these movies in the last roughly 24 hours.
Tommy, give me that gun, you Michigan. Put it down. And there's no such thing as a bad boy, only great girls. Besides, it's part of a worldwide franchise. Just look for the Golden Steeple, over 8 billion souls. Well, there's great possibilities for job advancement. Who knows? A little puff of smoke, and there's no place like Rome. There's no place like Rome. There I am on the Vatican. Play ball!
So he's using specific movie quotes, and we get the word Meshuggahs, not for the last time in this episode. And the line about great girls is suggestive. He refers to McDonald's. There's another Wizard of Oz reference. And he wants to become Pope. She is understandably speechless at this speech. We get a nighttime exterior of a church. The interior is a standard sitcom Catholic church set, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was the same set that they used on Soap a couple years earlier. There are a few parishioners in pews, silently praying. More caterers from stage left, wearing a cassock. The audience claps and squeals. He looks around and says the place is wonderful, really beautiful. The windows don't match, but it's still neat. He sees some votive candles burning. He says, don't they know there's an energy crisis? And they're wasting precious wax here. He says it's a great place for an echo. He yells hello loudly at the ceiling. A woman in a striped shirt looks annoyed. A teenage boy gets up and comes over. He says, excuse me, Father, you shouldn't be yelling in church. Mark says, why not? It's a great echo. The boy says, I have to talk to you, Father. Mark tells him not to be so formal, and he can call him Pops. Sort of a Fred reference. Mark briefly puts his arm on the boy's shoulder. The boy is a problem. He's been sitting over in that pew. Mark says the first thing is he's got to go to a cleaner seat. So now there's a poop joke to go with the pee joke of the previous episode. The boy says he's been thinking about things he's been writing on bus station walls. Mark says he's seen them. Gate 13. Ladies, and the Marines are looking for a few good men. The boy thinks that somebody else writes that stuff. He whispers in Mark's ear what he writes. Then Mark says, oh, there should be flies buzzing around you. So obviously something filthy. The audience laughs and claps. The boy wonders how he can be forgiven. Mark says he should start all over again and erase what he's written and put something people want to read, like nuclear energy cures acne, another nuclear reference, or Frank Sinatra has made his last comeback. And I think at that point Sinatra had not yet made his last comeback. The boy will do that right away. He thanks Pops. Mark is looking for Father Denny. He's here to apply for a job. The boy doesn't know where Father Denny is since he can't be here all the time. He thinks it's Father Denny's disco night. So, a disco reference. And it's supposed to be funny that a priest is going disco dancing. Then the boy exits. Mark decides to call Father Denny at home. How would he know what Father Denny's phone number is? He goes to look for a phone. The woman stands and says, excuse me, Father. And Mark says the same thing he did with the boy. What can I do for you, my son? She clasps her hands and says he must be the new priest. She says he's awfully young. He says in a year he'll be a little older. Then he does his bark laugh and punches her shoulder. And they start saying bless you back and forth to each other and she flees. The audience claps. Mark needs a dime for the phone, so he takes one from the contributions by the votive candles that are on stage right. He tells the statue, thank you. He opens the door and goes in, then closes it. He says it's like New York. Somebody ripped off the phone. A man in a suit and tie gets up, opens the door and goes in, as Mark says it's so dark he can't see. Then Mark says, you did what? With whom? As the man runs out, Mark says, wait a minute, have I got a story for you? And he thinks it's only fair because he listened to the man's story. Mark thinks there must be a full moon. The stage left door opens and a man with glasses enters. He says he needs a priest to give last rites. Mark says this is a democracy and you always have rights as long as you vote. Although, actually have rights even if you don't vote. The man says that Mark acts like he doesn't know what last rites are. Mark says it's when you add the fabric softener. No, that's last rinse. The man says, first it's funny newscasters, and now it's funny priests, because that was sort of a trend of the happy time newscasts. I think maybe mid-70s onward.
Last rites is what a priest says when someone is dying.
Someone's dying?
Yeah, me.
From what?
From suicide. I'm gonna kill myself.
Why?
I have nothing to live for.
Don't you realize that living is a precious thing? It's the meat in the sandwich of life.
It's my life. I can have it here or to go.
Well, I guess it's bad taste to say good luck, so ciao.
Hey, aren't you gonna try to talk me out of it?
Why? You said it was your life. I guess all you have to do is go up to the plate of life and bunt.
I don't believe this.
Why?
Well, I stand here and tell you I'm gonna kill myself, and you don't even try to help me.
You want help? All right, doesn't sound like the right thing, but I'll give you some help. Sit down, my son. Well, you have to kill yourself. Let's see, here's a good way. Wear a tutu and go into a leather bar. Here's another one. Here's another one. You try and smoke a real camel.
I knew I should have gone to St. Paul's.
No, here's a really good one. You go upstairs and hang in the big church bell upstairs. I go downstairs and play jingle bells. By the time I get to it, one horse open sleigh. Hey, you're a dead ringer. No, wait. What? Why don't you try and slip into a pair of water moccasins?
Let me out of here.
Deja vu.
So we can hear that the audience, or the laugh track, is highly amused, and we're getting more about sandwiches and baseball. I had remembered this episode as one of the weakest of the series. Even so, I am just still amazed at the sheer tastelessness of all this. I think you can joke about suicide, but it has to be done with either incredible sensitivity or with genuinely funny, outrageous, dark humor. Even the line about wearing a tutu and going into a leather bar just felt creepy. Really did not age well. And the joke about him being a dead ringer was just a long way to go for a tasteless pun. And then even though Mork didn't know what a pew was a few minutes ago, now he's making French jokes? Deja pew? The man in the confession booth doesn't have any lines, so he's not credited. Mary Benton, who was then about 44 and had her first role in The Waltons in 73 and somehow played an old lady on Happy Days in 78, is the woman in church here. Her last role was in 93, although she didn't die until 2017. The teenage boy is played by 14-year-old Brad Savage, who mostly worked from 72 to 87, although he did have a role in 2013, and he's now a producer. I will talk about Paul Wilson as suicidal confessor later. I'll talk more about this scene and the plot at the end, but I just have to say that this is probably the worst part of a bad episode. There's a sunny exterior of the house. Mork enters through the front door, still in his cassock. Mindy enters from her bedroom, brushing her hair. She wonders why he's dressed like that. He says he happened to run into a Jesuit garage sale. More seriously, he says he wants to be dressed correctly when they go to see Father Denny that afternoon, even though Mindy said they were going in the morning. Mindy says somehow she doesn't think that's appropriate, which will turn out to be an understatement. This is just a small piece of what's inappropriate. He doesn't get it. He says basic black is a little plain, and he asks to borrow her pearls. So there's a bit of cross-dressing jokes in this episode. As she takes out some lipstick, she says she doesn't mind going to church with him this morning. Yes, it's the morning. It's not the afternoon. Why would they be waiting around all day to go in the afternoon? Unless she had classes all through the morning. Also, was he out all night wearing the cassock? Why is he coming home in the morning? How late was he at the church? She says she really wishes he would dress like a normal person and try to fit in. In a stronger episode that does have that theme of him learning to become human and her wanting him to fit in, but also wanting him to be himself. He says he fit in last night. She asks what that means. He says, "Oh, dopey me." So one of his catchphrases will either say dopey me or dopey moi. She can't believe that he went to St. Peter's last night like that. He says it's all right because he helped a man to commit suicide. She is understandably shocked by this. He says the man didn't know how to do it, so he gave him 50 ways to meet his maker. The audience laughs. Compared to the delightful references to the 50 Ways to Meet Your Lover in the episode where Mork romances Cora, this just added to my unhappiness with this episode. Mindy says he's really done it this time. Now she's going to take him to see Father Denny, which she was anyway, but now it's even more urgent. There's a daytime exterior of the church. Father Denny is smiling as he sits in a pew. He stands and greets Mindy and Father Mork. Mork has a confession to make. Father Denny suggests that they step into his office. Mork says he was in there last night and someone ripped off the phone. The audience laughs. Father Denny is understandably outraged and he says, "You were here last night? You were dressed like that?" Mindy says that's kind of what Mork wants to confess. Mork says he wanted to be a priest. Father Denny asks if he thinks he has a genuine calling. Mork says no, he just has a black dress. And speaking of clothes, I just want to note that I really do like Mindy's look here. She's got sort of a Chrissy Snow side ponytail. She's wearing an olive green blouse, a skirt that's ecru with leaves on it, and matching ecru boots. Mork says he came here last night to apply for a job, and he was trying to fill out an application, and people started coming to him for help. He wasn't actually filling out an application, but whatever. Father Denny understandably has a look of disbelief on his face.
Well, you see, I guess apparently last night someone came in on the verge of suicide and...
Suicide? What was his name? What did he look like?
I don't usually commit to memory the people who are not going to make it through the night.
You realize you could have been the cause of someone's death just because you wanted to play priest?
I didn't want to play priest. I wanted to be a priest just like you.
What? I've spent 6 years studying to be a priest. Look, son, it's no sin to be a nitwit. But if you're going to go around giving out counsel and advice without the tools of education and experience, you could do more harm than good. All right, you've done something unforgivable. There's no excuse. I want you to get in there and take that cassock off right now.
With all these buttons in the dark?
Oh.
Why hasn't the church ever heard of a zipper?
Father Denny's lecture is definitely justified, but you can see that they're still trying to play it for laughs, like the thing about the buttons. Mindy says she's really sorry about this. Mork is impressionable, which we have heard her say in other episodes, and he really did want to be a priest. The man in glasses returns in a different outfit. He's looking for the young priest who was here on duty last night. Father Denny says that that man is no longer with St. Peter's. Mindy says he was only temporary. The man says he didn't know that they're temporary priests. Mindy says they're like Kelly girls, only they carry rosaries instead of little white gloves. She sits down, looking embarrassed.
Well, I wish he were here because I wanted to thank him for saving my life.
He saved your life?
Yeah. I came in here last night all ready to commit suicide. I never expected a priest to give me advice on how to kill myself. It was the one thing I wasn't prepared for.
How do you feel about suicide now?
Suicide's no answer. And he made me realize just how foolish I was being.
No kidding.
If you ever see him again, please tell him that he's a great priest and a wonderful judge of human nature.
My notes as I was watching this episode are, depression doesn't work like this. Awful advice. I will elaborate on that more at the end. Mork returns in one of his usual outfits, and he's holding the cassock. Father Denny goes over to him and says that Mork tried to throw that man out at the plate, but luckily he was able to slide into home on his own safely. More with baseball. He says that it seems like what Mork said to the man last night was exactly what he needed to hear. Mork actually saved the man's life. He says he has just one thing to say to Mork. Mork holds out his hand to shake and says, "Thank you," assuming that Father Denny is going to thank him. Father Denny says, "Do it again, and I'm gonna kick your cassock from here to kingdom come," like kicking his ass. And he exits stage right. Mindy doesn't understand why Mork did this in the first place. Mork says he doesn't seem to be able to do anything right. He saw the way that Mindy respected Father Denny and thought if he became a priest, she would respect him too. They sit. She says she respects him more than any person she knows. He says he can't seem to get a job and he can't even make it through interviews, and I'll talk more about that. She says what he has is the integrity to be himself, even if it means he's out of step with the entire planet, and she thinks that's really special. Mork says he realized he doesn't want to be a priest. They stand, and he says he wants to be a nun, or gender play. There's a daytime exterior of the house. Mork summons Orson. He sings a hymn which includes, "He who is fatter than all before him." He tells Orson it's been a wonderful week. He learned to have faith in himself. Orson says that's all anybody needs. Mork says on Earth they have the jumbo size called faith in God. Orson asks if all Earthlings believe in God. Mork says most of them do, especially when things get real hairy. Orson wonders how they can believe in something that science can't prove. Mork says that's the amazing part.
That's where something called faith comes in. You see, many people believe in God even though they don't see him, and they're called religious. Then there are a few people who believe in God and they do see him.
What are they called?
Prophets or Meshuggahs.
Strange, these Earthlings. They need to believe in something they cannot see.
I know, sir, but they don't have to see it. They feel it in their souls.
What's a soul?
I don't know. No one knows what it is or where it is.
Let me get this straight. On Earth, faith is the belief in something you can't see, which you feel in a place you can't feel.
You got it, big boy.
I need a drink.
Oh, come on, Orson. It's not that hard. All one has to do to prove one's faith is to look up in the sky. For example, where do stars come from?
They were created long ago by natural forces.
How do you know? Were you there?
Of course not. It's a scientific theory. You just have to accept it.
On faith.
Well, what do you believe, Mort?
Well, sir, I believe that the universe is one great big ball.
And what created that ball?
I don't know, sir. All I know is that if God didn't, at least he lets us play with it and hopes that we don't fumble. So until next week, this is Mork signing off. Nanu, Nanu.
So we get Meshuggah again. We get a comparison of faith to astronomy. what about the scientific method? Also, it's implied here that Orson drinks, and I kind of wonder, does he get drunk on soda like Mork does? I want more information about Orson's personal life. Mork had talked about God and religion in one of the season 1 episodes, and it's implied here that he does believe in God now. That was interesting, although obviously it would take more than that to become a priest. So, this episode is indeed an error, clerical and otherwise. I've talked before about how Jeannie and Remo generally get plots that go nowhere and they're just kind of filler. This episode was so bad that I wanted to hear more about them hosting the wedding reception and see how that went. I want to know, did Lori, possibly soon to be Mrs. Winslow, go through with it? But no, the episode is about Mork deciding he wants to become a priest in order to win the respect of somebody who respects him more than anybody, even though he encouraged suicide. Also, it feels weird that respect from Mork, both Mindy's respect and his self-respect, are tied in with his job hunt, even though we've already established that 1, his primary job is to observe this primitive planet and report back to work, and 2, he has been able to get jobs and keep them at least a little while, like when he was looking after the Science Museum. Yes, we will see him with a more permanent position at presumably a different daycare than one with murderous midgets. That is one of the threads of this season. It's not handled very well here, but it does somewhat impact his wish to become a priest. The episode is structured badly. The content aside, there's just a lot of back and forthing. The characterization of Father Denny is odd. I guess he's kind of like one of these old school, kind of tough but warm priests like you'd see in a 1930s movie maybe. Didn't really work. I don't blame Gary Goodrow. He's just working with what he has. The episode isn't funny. Even the things aside from the main plot are not funny. The energy level is okay, actually. There are definitely some episodes that feel more tired. This one felt stale at times, but everybody was certainly acting and overacting with enthusiasm. I rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 egg scale, which measures how well it delivers what I'm looking for in the series. I knew that this was going to be a 1.5 at best. I am going to put it on a level with episode 32, the one where Mindy almost had accidental brain surgery, and that got a 1.25. Between Mindy having a very cute outfit and the Remo cake thing, maybe some other incidental things, that probably ends up to a 1/4 of an egg, so I won't go with a 1. But this is indeed one of the weakest episodes of the series. Suicidal depression is very complicated. It is not something that's cured overnight. The fact that Robin Williams would kill himself doesn't necessarily make this a worse episode, but it does make it harder to watch. He struggled with mental illness for much of his life, and it was not something that if you just said, hey, well, why don't you kill yourself in all these ridiculous ways, he would have just said, yeah, I feel good about myself now. No. So Paul Wilson, let's talk about him. This poor, luckless young actor in this role was definitely not a career killer, thank God. He was then 34. He was active as an actor from 1970 to 2018, and he would have another role on this series in season 4. He also appeared on Laverne and Shirley 3 times, twice playing their old high school classmate whose nickname was Eraserhead because he was prematurely balding. Most memorably, I know him for his 47 episodes as Gary Shandling's neighbor Leonard Smith on It's Gary Shandling Show. He was the one who would enforce the rules of the condo association, also just dropping by as a neighbor. That sitcom played a lot with sitcom conventions, and he did well with that. This is an unplayable role. You could maybe do one scene. It might be viable on some level, but to just have that kind of literally overnight turnaround in a character who's not going to therapy, who didn't spend the rest of the night calling up a dear friend or talking to somebody in his family or somebody else that he trusts, or, I don't know, maybe another priest in town. He just somehow went home and thought, oh, I'm being a silly willy, wanting to kill myself. Now I've had some sense shaken into me. What could anyone do with this role? Also just incredibly irresponsible for them to, in essence, tell children, because that is their main audience, it seems at times, that if your friend says they're going to kill themselves, you just kind of make a joke out of it and give them wacky methods. 50 ways. No. Possibly the most irresponsible episode of Mork and Mindy. And again, it's not even funny, so what is the point of this? I also rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 heart scale, which measures how well it supports the romantic relationship between Mork and Mindy. Like the previous episode, this is a half star, but for different reasons. That one was just, hey gang, let's put on a show, and it was not about the Mork and Mindy dynamic, really. Here, there's quite a bit of them. My God, why would you want her to get involved with somebody like this? But she does support him. She does try and intervene for him to translate what he's going through. In a twisted sort of way, he was doing this all for her respect. Although, of course, had he gone through with it somehow... And remember, he's an alien from another planet, so I'm not sure how he would be able to join the priesthood, particularly without much knowledge of Catholicism. But anyway, he would have been celibate, and so that wouldn't really have helped their romantic relationship. At least he values her opinion. Yeah, going with a half a heart. There may be worse episodes than this, but they are not immediately springing to mind. The one with Mindy in the hospital was just asinine and unfunny. This one is actually, I think, more offensive in some ways, but not worse. I think it makes me rantier. I'd have to listen to my podcast again to see how pissed off I got at that episode. Is this skippable? Honey, it's burnable. If you watch it, just know it was another time. 1 1/4 eggs, half a heart. This is Paula Schaffner with a big freaking clerical error. Nanu, bless you.
That's where I come in.
Christmas, darling. Merry Christmas, lads.
Merry Christmas, Mrs. Stanley. Gee, it looks like the lads and I closed the joint, huh?
Hey, good to see you guys. Boy, you wouldn't think Tom Petty would be one of the lads, would you? You know, it's not easy to get into this group. Last year they kicked out Springsteen because he wouldn't wear the sweater.
Well, I guess it's time to go spread a little Christmas cheer now, Garen.
Christmas cheer, Tom? Don't you mean Christmas cool?
Oh, great.
The bird